that because it's easy to bless God and thank Him when we're in the land of plenty, when everything is good. But to be able to say when my hands are empty and when I'm struggling, and maybe you find yourself in one of those seasons or places this morning, I want to encourage you, you're not here by accident today. I do feel excited and encouraged by today's word. And so the title this morning is Waiting Rooms, and you see part 1, which means if you come back next week, what will be next? Part 2, right. So there will be a rest of the story to connect to. But how many of you love waiting rooms? Now, if you're a people watcher like me, they're fascinating, aren't they? And I'd like to see if you identify with any of these people. So I wrote down a couple of things. You have people, how do we wait? So here's how I've seen people wait. We fidget, right? With our hands, with our keys. We play on our phone, right? Some people take phone calls. If the waiting room has a TV monitor, then we're acting like we are engrossed in the Weather Channel for some reason, although we would never watch it at home, right? We sit maybe and just look worried and we fret. Or maybe you or someone you love dearly looks around the room and says, hey, do you see that picture's crooked over there? Right? Our OCD kicks in. Or do we get up and we complain to the receptionist about having to wait? I would like to remind you, you're in a room that's called the what? The waiting room. You're probably going to have to wait some. Now I realize we don't want to wait all day, but it is called a waiting room for a reason. And it's so easy in life to want to jump ahead, to jump seasons, or to get out of one that's uncomfortable or that we're unsure of. And I'll be the first to say, it's easy to want to jump to the next thing, right? It's easy to start new projects and not finish old ones, amen? Right? It's like when you go and you're like, okay, I'm going to clean out my closet, or I'm going to clean out the garage, and you get halfway through and all you've managed to do is tear up the house. And then you're in the middle of the mess going, actually, I have no more passion to do this anymore, right? So it's easy to want to quit sometimes and stop the waiting and just make something happen. And I want us to think for a minute, back in the Old Testament, if I asked and polled people, who's probably the most well-known prophet? I'm going to guess you'll say Elijah, right? And why do most people say Elijah? Well, if you look at 1 Kings chapter 18, either in your Bible or on your phone app, or we will put scriptures up here. 1 Kings chapter 18, this is the contest on Mount Carmel. This is the holy showdown where Elijah is going against 850 prophets of Baal, so evil prophets that serve a false god. And this is where Elijah has them try to get their gods to bring fire down to burn up the altars. And then Elijah prays and asks the one true God to send fire down, and of course God does. And so this is this tremendous victory. And so what I want you to realize is if you didn't read anything prior, if you went to 1 Kings 18, chapter 18, verse 2, it says, so Elijah went to appear before Ahab. So you have no context on Elijah. You just know, okay, he's going before Ahab. Ahab is the evil king, whose wife is Jezebel, who's evil, who they all serve these false gods. And that's all you would know. So let's go to verse 1 of that same chapter. Let's back up one more verse. Later on, in the 3rd year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain. So now you have a little more context on Elijah. You're like, okay, so he's following what God said to do, and apparently there's been a drought for 3 years, right? And now God is sending me to say, we're going to get some rain. But if you only saw this part of Elijah, you would just think God called him, boom, chapter 18, God tells him to go, and he is called and equipped to go be in front of 850 prophets of Baal and to do this mighty victory for God. He's in this amazing season. You have people you know that seem to be in an amazing season, right? And you're not. you're in the yucky, crappy, want to get out of it season right now, right? And so we can look at this one season, this snapshot, or as we say on social media, this one little blurb of perfection that we think is reality, and we have no idea what has brought them to this point. We see the job promotion. We see the brand new marriage. We see the new baby. We see the new puppy. We see all these milestone events, but we don't see what happened to get there. We always say every seat has a story in here. And I don't know everything about each one of you, but you've went through some stuff to be here today. Tell your neighbor, I've seen some things, right? I have seen some things, right? I have lived some life. There's some miles on this scooter right here, right? We have been going for a while. And so what I want us to realize, before God ever promotes us and puts us in these seasons, he's going to have us in some waiting rooms. And these are the rooms where no one else truly sees what God is doing until he gives you an opportunity to share it. And he's not going to give you an opportunity to share it, what he's doing, until he knows you got it, right? He wants to make sure it's clear so that when he launches you out to start sharing it, you know what you're doing. And that's hard. It's like handing keys to an 8-year-old and saying, have fun with the car. We don't do that, do we? No. They would kill themselves, someone else, and probably ruin everything, right? And so thinking about this, let's go to 1 Kings 17. And just so you're aware, if you would happen to Google, when is Elijah first mentioned in the Bible? 1 Kings 17, just one chapter before. But if you only saw 1 Kings 18, you would have missed the entirety of what God did to get to this point in Elijah's life. And so I want us to look at this today. This got me really excited because it's one of those aha moments where when you're reading through something, you're like, I see what God is doing. And I hope that this applies to your life as much as it did to mine, because there are seasons that feel rough, but God's doing something. You've probably heard the phrase, in the waiting, God is working. Say that with me. In the waiting, God is working. He's actually doing things behind the scenes that you know nothing about. He's actually doing stuff in you that you know nothing about, in a sense, because you don't know what he's building in you, what he's going to do with that down the road. He just has you in a waiting room, and you're trying to figure it out. So let's look first at the first 7 verses. Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. There's your context we were missing at the beginning of chapter 18. So who sent the drought? God. Who gave the word first? God through Elijah, and he's giving the second word in chapter 18. Hey, now I'm going to send some rain. But 3 years plus have passed. So what happened in between? Have you ever wondered when you haven't seen someone for years? You're like, man, I wonder what they've been doing, right? Let me tell you about Elijah. Let's see what Elijah's been doing. So here he goes. This is the first mention of him. And we know that he's talking to King Ahab. And if you read before this, he's going before an evil king and people who are not serving God. And he's like, hey, by the way, God's judging. You will not get any rain or dew for until God says it's going to rain. We know later it's 3 years plus. Verse 2. Then the Lord said to Elijah, go to the east and hide by Kerith Brook, near where it enters the Jordan River. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. Okay, let me give you some more context. When you look up Kerith or Cherith, depending on how you study that, it means the cutting away. Say that with me. The cutting away. He's sending him to a place named the cutting away. Does that sound like a good vacay to you? That doesn't seem like a waiting room I actually want to go into. I don't like needles, medical things. God bless nurses and other people who do those things. right? I don't want to be near the instruments that cut things. And yet here God is taking him to a place called the cutting away. And I want you to realize his basic instructions he just gave him. 3. He said, go. Then he says, drink. And then he says, eat. That's pretty basic. I feel like we could all do that. Go, drink, eat. We could all do that, right? And sometimes people want to complicate the calling of God in our lives and his instructions, but God can speak pretty plainly. He says go, or he says no, or he says yes, or he says wait. And so he gives him basic instructions. Go, drink, eat. Can God trust us to follow basic instructions? Have you ever given basic instructions and watched it fail miserably? And you're like, I feel like it got lost in translation, but I really feel like this is the only way to say this. If you love having that experience, go into teaching. That's what teaching is. Rinse and repeat. You think you've explained it, and then they're like blank stares and do it all wrong, and you're like, let me find 12 other ways to say the same thing. Or try parenting. It's very similar, right? And so sitting there thinking about this, can God trust us to just do basic things? He didn't make it difficult. He said, go, you're going to drink from here, and you're going to eat this. And I'm going to provide everything you need right here. But what's interesting, we're going to find out, he's just proclaimed that there is going to be no rain and no dew. So what will eventually happen to this brook?
Dry up.
It's going to dry up. Now that doesn't happen in a day or a week, probably not even in a month. There's a period of time where all his needs are met right there at the brook by God. He has all the water he needs, and he has ravens bringing him food. That don't sound bad right now, right? We're like, how is that called the cutting away? That feels like I'm just sitting there relaxing, and God's just meeting my needs. And there will be seasons where God does perhaps provide this way for us, because he is trying to work on us. So why would God send him somewhere where the provision is going to dry up? Where it's going to run out? Because he's in a waiting room. This isn't a permanent destination for Elijah. This is a stop. As we like to say, this is a chapter in the story of Elijah. But this is not his whole life. But it's pivotal for his next chapter. And I want you to see that, because some of us don't like our chapters right now. I did not like the 7 years of college every day of my life that I was there. In fact, I questioned a lot of life choices during those days. Why did I agree to do this degree? Why did I think this was a good idea? I could be out doing this. And some of you may feel that, or some of you might be working thinking, man, am I going to work till I die? Or why did I say I wanted 5 kids? Or what? You know what I mean? We get in seasons, and we have blessings in these seasons, but sometimes they wear differently. And so God puts us in a waiting season, and it's probably a carrot, a cutting away season. Because there are things that are happening in our lives that are interfering with our growth. Things that maybe block out God's voice to be able to speak to us. And so he's got to pull us away into a waiting season where we're a little more isolated. Does it say anybody was there with him at this place? No, just him and the Lord. And in this season, God's preparing and equipping him in this story and us, because we know in the very next chapter, just several years later, he's going to go face 850 enemies of God who are powerful and do this mighty showdown in front of all of these people. He wasn't ready for that. He had a waiting season that had to happen to prepare him so God could use them. I've heard it said this way: we have to sit before we can take a stand. Sometimes we got to sit. Sometimes we don't get the job. Sometimes we don't get the girl. Sometimes we don't get the guy. Sometimes we don't get this next thing yet, because God is preparing us to stand. And we're just not ready yet. Have you ever watched new baby calves being born after they've just been born? We live near farmland, and after they drop the calves, you can tell which ones. We call them fresh nuggies, although they're not nuggies. We just say that. Look at the little fresh nuggies, right? The little fresh calves out there. And how do we know they're fresh? Number one, they're tiny, they're wobbly, and they haven't been tagged yet on their ear, right? They haven't quite gotten all the way to the others. And they huddle near their mama because they have no idea what's going on. And sometimes God has us in that same state. We're scared, huddled, no clue what's going on, right? We don't have our legs under us yet, and so he's preparing us to take a stand. But no one gets excited to go to a wilderness or a waiting season. No one else signed up and said, hey, Elijah, that sounds like fun. Can I come too? Right? Just Elijah. Just Elijah sitting there. It's estimated that he was there in this season of cutting away for 8 to 12 months. So let's think about his days. Watching the brook slowly dry up every day. A little less water every day. That will inspire you, won't it? And yet he's following and obeying God to the fullest. He's doing exactly what God said. And God said, I will have ravens come and feed you. So let's look at the next verse. So Elijah did as the Lord told him and camped beside the Kerith brook, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. God delivered his promise. Even in this season that absolutely, I'm sure, made no sense. And it was a season where he was watching his resources slowly dwindle. This brook's drying up. And you think about this, and you think about ravens. Ravens are meat eaters. God's actually using meat eaters to bring him meat, but they could be enjoying themselves. Isn't God awesome? Mm-hmm. He will use unusual things in unlikely places to provide our needs. And so if we can pause and sit back and let God do what only he can do, you'll be amazed at how he will meet our needs. And he's teaching this to Elijah because he's going to use this in the very next season. He wants him to understand, Elijah, I need you to know how to listen to my voice. I need you to know how to obey my voice and my commands. And that's what he's doing for us. Because the next season you're going to get promoted to is going to have a battle and something else that you're going to need to step up to the plate, but you don't want to be in the middle of the battle and not be able to hear God. You want to know the shepherd's voice so that when you're in this next season, you can clearly do what he's asked you to do. And so in the next verse, it says, but after a while, we know 8 to 12 months probably, the brook dried up. It's all gone, right? For there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. Now I want you to realize, what would be our tendency right here if all our resources dried up? Complain, right? Panic. Start trying to do all the things that we could possibly manage to do to fix our situation. That's our human nature. But I want you to realize in this, God is never blind to your situation, and he is not deaf to what you're crying out to him about. He sees and he knows everything. So let's see what happens next. Does God just leave him there to die? Say it with me. No. No. Is he going to leave you where you're at till you die? No. He is growing you and he is progressing you, but it's a process. No one loves process, do we? Right? When you're trying to track a package and it says it's in transit, it's in transit. See, the other day I bought something and I try to buy United States only because usually it actually arrives. The other day I found this great gift and something to give to Greg and I was like, yeah, and it looked like it came through an American company because I thought, okay, it'll be easy to track. It came from China. It's a great thing. It actually came, so I want to give credit. But what I will say is for the longest time, there were no updates. It's just like, it's coming from China. We'll let you know when it hits the States. And there was a period of time where I knew nothing. And then finally it's like, hey, by the way, it made port. So I'm like, well, we're on the big continent now over here. We might get it. And it did come. But there was waiting and anticipating. So let's look what happens next. Then, so after this happened, then the Lord said to Elijah, go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you. Does that sound like promotion? You're going to go walk some more, and you're still going to have to trust me. And I've told this woman who's a widow. He didn't say the queen's going to come give you a party and invite you in the palace. He said, you're going to go, and there's going to be a widow. Did he give him the widow's name? No. Not enough information for most of us. But he says, go and live. Again, basic instructions that he had to follow. And thankfully, we see in the next verse, so he went. Elijah has learned how to listen to God's voice and his basic instructions and how to follow them. He learned here by the brook, but while God's isolating and separating him and giving him butterflies to talk to, because no one else is there, right? Rinse and repeat that day for months on end. He has learned and been able to hear God because nothing's interfering. And now God says, okay, now I'm going to put you somewhere else. Did he head into the prophets of Baal? No. He again sends him somewhere that makes no sense to most of us. And says, by the way, go here and live, and I'm still going to provide for you. So he went to Zarephath. As he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her. So he says, would you bring me a little water in a cup? As she was going to get it, he called to her, bring me a bite of bread too. Hey, by the way, while you're up, will you get me, right? This is what we do in the house. Hey, since you're up, right? Since you're already on your way, hey, will you get me one too? So think about this. Now, he has learned enough. He's hungry and thirsty because he's had no water. The brook's dried up. He's already on the road. The ravens aren't following him down the road as far as we know. So he's hungry and thirsty. And after everything he's experienced, he's like, well, God took care of it there. I'm going to ask this lady what God told me to say. And so he follows instructions, and I'm sure he thinks this will be nothing. I mean, a cup of water and a bite of bread will be nothing to months in a wilderness, and surely this request will be easy, and we'll just get this problem fixed. But look at her reply. But she said, I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. And I have only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die. Do you think that's the response Elijah expected? No, God had just taken care of everything. He had birds flying food. How hard should this be? But then God intersects his life with someone in a desperate situation. On purpose, God puts him here. And then he finds out not only is this woman a widow and has nothing, she's also trying to feed a son. And I wonder, when we think about her replies, I underlined in my Bible, and you may want to do that or highlight in your app, 3 phrases in her response. I don't have. And then she says, I have only, or like we say, I only have. And then she says, I was just. How many times are we in a season that feels like, I don't have? Mm-hmm. Or I only have. Mm-hmm. I was just, right? And on purpose, God intersects her life with Elijah because she's in a desperate situation where she's hopeless and helpless and needs something herself, and yet God is going to do something miraculous in her life with Elijah. Do we catch ourselves saying, God, I don't have, or I only have, or I was just? And if I think about this with Elijah, I'm sure his response could have been, like many of us, oh, this is great, God. You sent me here and here. This lady has nothing. I at least thought you would send me to someone who had a full cupboard and wasn't like providing. It isn't like gathering sticks to go die, right? We would start to get maybe a little defensive with God, but he doesn't. Why? Because he's learned something in the cutting away season. God does unusual things with unlikely people and in unlikely situations to show us his power and authority. And while he was isolated and separated, do you know he wasn't lonely? Who was with him? God. Every single day he was with God. Maybe you're not seeing progress right now. Maybe you feel like you're stuck somewhere and you're unsure and you're waiting for answers. How are you waiting right now? Is the Jeopardy theme song going through your head? Doo, 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 right? How are we waiting? Are we waiting impatiently? Are we asking God, what are you trying to teach me in this season? Are we reading? Are we praying? Are we trying to listen to his voice? Something I feel convicted on. Are you limiting your distractions? Right? So many things can pull our time and attention. Are we reevaluating priorities? Are we getting quiet and still before God? Have you tried to give instructions to kindergartners lately? I have. And do you know how hard it is to get them quiet and still to hear the most basic instructions? I feel like sometimes God is dealing with us similarly. It's like, Tonya, will you sit down and be quiet so you can actually hear me, right? And you can focus on what I'm trying to teach you, right? So thinking about this, Elijah's learned how to hear God and to obey his voice and commands. He's watched God be faithful and provide. And so when he gets this negative response from the widow, who she's not just trying to be negative, she's giving him a reality check of where she's at. That seems like a dead end to nowhere in a bad situation. He relies on what he's learned by the brook, not what he sees in front of him. And there's the lesson he was getting prepared for. Because now he's in a dire situation that needs something that he physically doesn't have. And where's he going to look? He's going to look to God. And he's like, listen, I know we don't see the answer around here. If he's from the south, he's like, honey child, I don't see the flower either. But I know I can pray. And we can have an answer. And so let's see what he says. But Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again. Now those seem like simple things, but as I was diving and studying and praying, I thought about this. He's learned to be dependent on God for his needs. He's learned that God has all power and authority. How are we doing with that? And that doesn't mean we're inactive. He's about to be active in this miracle and in the miracles to come. So yes, God uses us, but we know that our blessings come from God. And so in this situation, he responds with faith, not fear. What did he tell her first off? Don't be afraid, right? He's responding in faith, not fear. And then guess what he just does? What I just learned, I'm going to teach you. What does he give her? Basic instructions that he learned in the waiting season by the brook. What does he tell her to do? Go, do, use. Say that with me. Go, do, use. So think about that for a minute. Because we've all lived long enough. I'm sure there's something you learned when you were younger that has already came around full circle and you realize, God taught me that then because he knew I would need that here, right? I went through that thing that made no sense, because God was getting me ready for this thing. And so here Elijah, who has learned God's voice, seen his power, authority, provision, is giving her the same lessons that he's already learned. This is discipleship 101, really, when you think about it. He's sharing basic instructions. I wonder where he learned that, right? And then, here's the other piece. When he responds with faith and not fear, he is also sharing with her some principles he's learned about God. And they're written in his response. So look at verse 14. The first thing he shares, the Lord, the God of Israel, says. So where is he putting all of his hope? Right there, in what God says. I know his voice, and this is what he says. Then he says, there will always be. And then he says, until the time when the Lord sends. So he's giving her instructions. He's teaching her principles. Let's see what happens. The next verse. So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. I got a couple phrases I want you to repeat. There was always enough. Say that with me. There was always enough. And then, just as the Lord promised. Just as the Lord promised. So he's teaching her what he learned as an individual. And he's passing it along to someone in a desperate situation. And he is teaching her the things that he's learned about God. And then God is doing what only God can do in this situation. And he is showing himself to show the power and authority and provision he provides. Now, this would be a great story if it just stopped there. It would be a pretty awesome story, right? This guy was fed by ravens by the brook. He encounters a widow. She has nothing. They're about to die. Elijah comes, and he says, hey, don't worry. God's going to provide, and God provides. That's not bad. That's a good life. But that's not what happens. Something else is going to happen, and Elijah is there for a reason. So the next verse says, sometime later. It doesn't tell us how long. Don't you love when movies do that or TV shows? Sometime later. And they don't tell you how much time has progressed. We don't technically know that. Sometime later, the woman's son became sick. He grew worse and worse, and finally he died. This would be the depressing part of the movie that would make you want to turn it off and say, why am I watching this, right? This is where you lose hope. This is where you feel helpless, right? And so, then she said to Elijah, O man of God, what have you done to me? Have you come here to point out my sins and kill my son? So things were good for a period of time. And then over time, change comes to this house. And over time, as he gets sick and sick and sick, and then he passes. And then it becomes life-threatening. Has Elijah faced anything like that before? Oh, wait, yeah, when he was sitting at a brook, things were good for a time. And then they started getting worse and worse and worse as the brook is drying up. And then finally it became life-threatening when there was no water. Mm-hmm. He's prepared for this moment. He didn't realize it when he was watching the brook dry up that he was going to have this moment. But God was preparing him for this moment. Her response, her words, show exactly where she's at. She feels hopeless. And she feels helpless. And I will say, on our own, without God, that's exactly how we feel. Sin does that so well to us. When we feel like we're the masters of our own universe and we try to control and manipulate things, we will get to a very similar point where we are left feeling hopeless and helpless. But God has a way for us. And she's crying out to God through Elijah. And let's see his response. But Elijah replied, give me your son. And he took the child's body from her arms, carried him up the stairs to the room where he was staying, and laid the body on his bed. He says, give me your son. Give me your situation that is hopeless and helpless, that you cannot fix on your own, the thing that's keeping you up at night, the thing that has you deep in grief, the thing that you can't get past on your own, the thing that you can't fix, the thing that's breaking your heart. Give this to me. And she hands it over. I want you to see that. Then Elijah cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, why have you brought tragedy to this widow who has opened her home to me, causing her son to die? Elijah cries out to God. He already knows the source. The answer does not lie within himself. He didn't ask to get the son just so he could say, look at what I did. He immediately takes him and cries out to the Lord. He takes him to the upper room, cries out to God on her behalf. And it says in verse 21, and he stretched himself out over the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, please let this child's life return to him. Now, if you're not familiar with the Bible, this may not strike you as interesting, but we just came through Easter, and we talked about someone who stretched himself out on a cross. We know the number 3 significant many times in the Bible. It's interesting here that it's 3 times. It's 3 days until Christ arose. Christ arose and was resurrected to new life. So thinking about all of that, look at the next thing that happens. The Lord heard. Say that with me. The Lord heard. If you didn't get any other words today, I hope you get those. The Lord heard. God is always listening to what we have to say. He wants to move. He wants us to believe and show himself strong for his people, but we have to be willing to cry out and give him the thing that we can't fix and say, God, I can't do this on my own. And so he says, the Lord hears Elijah's prayer, and the life of the child returned, and he revived. Then Elijah brought him down from the upper room and gave him to his mother. Look, he said, your son is alive. Isn't that exciting? He gives this boy a resurrected new life. What does God do for us? Through his son Jesus. He gives us a resurrected new life. This is one of my main arguments right here, if you want to take a passage, for why I don't throw away the Old Testament. There are people that want to do that. This not only foreshadows other things of Christ, but it also explains God's provision and his character. And if you get rid of all of these things, you don't have the complete picture. It's so important to read both. So he brings him down, shows her the child, and I want you to see this next word. Such a small English word. Verse 24, what's that first word? Anybody see that? Then. Say that with me. Then. See, there's a lot of things that happen in life after then. It wasn't until after all of these experiences, and especially this miracle, that this widow comes to this belief and understanding about Elijah and about God. She didn't have this knowledge until she had done life with Elijah, and Elijah didn't have this knowledge until he had sat by a brook by himself. And now it's getting passed on, and in this moment, let's see what she says. Then the woman told Elijah, now. See, it doesn't happen until after then, and then now I know. Now I know. She didn't know this in the beginning. Now I know for sure that you are a man of God, and that the Lord truly speaks through you. So she's understood 2 levels of understanding. Personal. God is truly God. He provides and does miraculous things. She's learned that. And she's learned a positional thing, that God puts people in positions like Elijah, who he calls. How does she know that? How does she speak that? You're a man of God. He's called you. And then she knows that he's called him to speak because she said, the Lord truly speaks through you. So what happened just now for Elijah? God just confirmed his call and his mission on his life. And it never would have happened if he'd have just thrown him on the scene in 1 Kings 18 and said, hey, here's the prophets, go get them, boy. That would have been lovely, we think. But he had to go through this training ground for himself, for a widow and her son. And then, here's the cool part. Like, we think that all of this is just about him helping this widow, but she's turned around in this conversation and reaffirmed for him, right before he hits the toughest battle of his life, the showdown on the mountain. She's reaffirming for him what she sees in him, his God-given identity. Hey, God's called you, and he is going to use you to speak for him. Boy, isn't that going to be helpful when he's got to speak for God with over 1,000 people? Actually, it's millions, because that's just the prophets and a few others. That's not everybody else. So thinking about this, if we only had 1 Kings 18, it would read so much differently, I believe, if 1 Kings 17 didn't exist. And some of us have chapters we hate about our life, things that we couldn't control that happened to us. Maybe they were messes we made on our own. Maybe they were circumstances we had to suffer through, losses, illness, setbacks. And as we say, setbacks are an opportunity for comeback. I would say Elijah experienced a lot of those things. And maybe you're in one that feels like a waiting room that's so boring you can't wait to get out. Or maybe you feel like you're in a season like this widow where it's just a slow death. It might feel that way. I want you to know God's not wasting one moment of that road. He is doing something in you, to do something through you, to better not just your life, but the other lives he's going to intersect with it. This is going to be pivotal to your promised land. But if you skip 1 Kings 17, you will not be able to experience what God wants you to do in 1 Kings 18. As we get ready to close, I want to mirror this process. We heard another minister talk about how God works in us and through us. And if you think about the cross, right, you have this and then you have this. So I want you to visualize this. Because before God can work through us out to people, he has to be working in us, right? We have to have salvation. We have to have the Holy Spirit in us, empowering us. So then we know who we are, we know what he's called us to do, and then we can go out. So he described it this way. If you like to think about it, it goes from he to me, and then you can think of it like this situation, we, Elijah and the widow and her son, and then they was Elijah and the prophets of Baal and everybody else. He didn't skip a process. So he to me, to we, to they. If you read the Bible, that's how he does it almost every time. I want you to think about these. You probably know these characters. Joseph. Everybody remember Joseph? The young boy with dreams. And the dreams that things would bow down to him and worship him. And he shared that with his brothers. And that didn't go well, did it? No. We've talked about that. He went to the pit. They hated him so much for those dreams, right? So God, he gave this vision to him, right? To poor little Joseph as a young teen who thought he understood all of God's plans at that point. And then he thought, I will share that. Everyone would want to know this wonderful news. Not always. Not everyone understands God's call. I'm going to say that again. Not everyone understands God's call on your life. But it will make sense if you keep following God and obeying his voice. So he goes through and he shares it to we with his brothers and parents. And guess what his waiting season looked like? Prison. Wasn't by a brook, but it was in prison. And then it went to we, an entire nation, where he helped save a nation. But Joseph didn't skip the process. One other one I think of is David. Young shepherd boy. God gets David out of the field, gets him anointed as a young man over all his brothers. You're going to be the next king. And then David is back in the field. It's just him and the sheep and the Lord. And he's fighting bears, right? So from God to David to his little family and his little flock of sheep. Until God says, okay, it's time for Goliath and the kingdom. So this process we're going through, he got the wilderness, he got the field. Joseph got prison. Elijah had the time by the brook.
You might be waiting for a purpose. And so this morning I want to encourage you, don't quit. Keep waiting and doing the work, because God's doing something right now you will never understand until that season hits. And I will share this with you. I share it every now and then, not because I think you need to know more about my life, but a lot of times you see someone in a season and you forget what they've been through. And sometimes you need to hear that someone else went through process. So I want to say that because maybe someone feels like God's going to use me in a certain way. And I do believe that. God's going to use every person here. He has something for you to do in his kingdom. I started out teaching Sunday school to 2 8-year-old boys in the basement of a church with flannel boards. If you know what flannel boards are, I know flannel boards, all about them, right? The little characters that you smack on the board but they don't stay, right? And then you're trying to move them around and give them voices and make them talk and all the things, right? Yeah, I was working the flannel board trying to teach 8-year-olds, and by the way, I was maybe 14, but I was working for the Lord, right? And I helped lead worship. And I learned to play piano. I do play piano. And so then I was like, oh, it would be great if I could learn to play a hymn. And so I learned to play 2 hymns. And they would let me on Wednesday night rotate every Wednesday the 2 songs I knew. That sounded terrible. But they would let me play them for offering, right? Because God's people are good and they love you through your seasons. That's why you need community, because we've been there, right? I am a mess on many days. Come to small groups, you'll hear all about all of our trials, right? But anyhow, did all of those things. And the one thing that I hated growing up was speaking in public. Terrified. Hated school projects. Always volunteered in a group project to be the writer, never the speaker. Never wanted to do that. Never wanted to debate anybody. Never wanted to give a speech. Never wanted any of it. And I share this because it's easy to think that it will be a smooth transition as God's calling you to take steps. Nope, it's messy and you'll fail. How do I know? Messy failure. Woo-hoo! Done that. Still probably doing that. Went to a youth retreat, over 100 youth. And I shared this, and I'll close after this, but I feel like sometimes we forget that God just wants obedience to his voice with basic instructions. And when we don't follow them, we get to try again. He keeps working with us. So I went to this retreat, and they had asked, because at that season I was doing worship at my church, and they said, hey, would you love to lead worship? And I said, actually, no, I wouldn't. Thanks so much. But I don't do that in front of large crowds. We have a small church at my home church, and so you've got all these other talented youth, and I schmoozed my way out of that one, right? I was like, oh yeah, you're asking how many people I can do better. And I sat down very satisfied with myself that I didn't have to do anything. I could come and consume the weekend as a youth. And I'm sitting there, and someone else did lead. God always has someone that will step in, but you may give up something he wanted you to do. Just want to point that out. God's never unable to provide a need, even if it's something you've rejected doing for him. He'll call someone else. He's got plenty of people. So I sat there, and I was like, yay, this is great. I just get to sit here. And then I started feeling, and you know what I'm talking about? It's called conviction. When you know you did wrong, and God spoke to you, and you didn't do it. Anybody? And maybe you don't even know that. Sometimes you feel those feelings, and you don't even realize it in the moment that that's what that was. But it got so heavy. I was so sure I was in trouble, we'll say it that way. And no one else had said a word. Service was going on, so it's not like anyone else put this conviction on me. It was the Lord. And he's like, Tonya, I want you to give a testimony. Oh, you could feel my heart drop to the floor right there. And I was like, I don't do that. Like, that's what I said in my head. Like, God, you know me. I don't speak in front of people. Clearly, I try to sing, but I don't speak. And so the service has progressed. And as you know when the singing's done, the preaching's coming. And if you're going to give a testimony, typically that happens in the song service, so that it can happen anytime. But I knew the progression well. And we were singing, and I was like, okay, well, we're almost, God, I could probably just do it, another time. And it got so heavy that I felt like I was literally going to die if I didn't obey. And so at the most awkward point, and I point out the word awkward, yes, at the most awkward point in the service, in between everyone sitting down from the final song and the preacher's walking up, in my heart, I thought it was going to pound out of my chest, and I'm like, I don't do this now. And I'm gripping the pew in front of me, and I'm literally shaking. I will not lie, I was literally shaking, and I'm like,
sitting there, and I'm like, hi, my name is Tonya, and I'm from Grafton, and I live in Georgia, and I just want to thank God, and I don't even know what came out of my mouth. I'm sure it did not really glorify the Lord too much. It was a hot train wreck. And by the time I sat down, flames of embarrassment on my face. And I'm pretty sure I might have cried a little. I might have had my head down, like it was bad. I won't lie, I can like almost feel it right now. Like that's how pivotal this was for me, right? And I remember sitting down and I remember being so upset. Why? I was embarrassed. I knew I'd failed and this was a test. I knew I'd failed the first test, so God had to give me another test. And I just felt like I really messed that one up, and now I was embarrassed. And I remember thinking in my mind, God, why did you make me do that? You didn't get any glory. All I did was make a mess. He's like, it was only about obedience. I don't really care what you said. I mean, that's great. It was about obedience. Now, I was still embarrassed for a while, because that's my nature. But I learned something. Obedience. Sometimes it's just doing the thing. And what did Elijah learn while he's sitting by a brook? Obedience. What did he learn when he went to a widow's house? Obedience. What did he teach her? Obedience. What's he about to do in the showdown of his life? Obedience. It may not make sense, it may not be popular, but waiting on God and listening for his voice and obeying him. I say all that to say, that was my journey. You've already got one. You've already got a testimony. You've already got a thing that God's doing in you. But I want to leave you with encouragement. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 26 to 31. Look up into the heavens. Who created all that? See, sometimes we like to skip to verse 31, which I'm going to read, which tells us to wait on the Lord and we'll renew our strength. We're getting there in case you were guessing, if your mind works that way. Mine does. Verse 26, look up into the heavens. Who created all the stars? So if you need to draw back from your situation that you're so narrowed in on, and God needs to change your perspective back and says, wait a minute, Tonya, who made this? Who's in charge here, right? Who's making this planet spin perfectly so you don't burn or freeze? That'd be God. He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by its name. He's named the stars. Don't you think he cares about you? Because of his great power and incomparable strength, nothing compares, not a single one is missing. Do you know you're not lost to the Lord right now? He knows exactly where you're at. He knows exactly where you and I are at. Next verse. Oh, Jacob, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? I want you to put your name where that says Jacob. Do that with me. We're going to do it out loud. Ready? Oh, Tonya, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? Oh, Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Next verse. Have you never heard? Have you never understood? If you haven't, let me refresh your memory. Here it goes. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. He never gets tired of us talking to him and asking. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He knows more than we could ever even comprehend. He gives power to the weak. You feeling weak today? Like something else is going to win? That's your source. And he gives strength to the powerless. Even youths, that's all of us. I'd like to think we're all young. Whether in body or spirit, you may decide. Even youths will become weak and tired. And young men will fall in exhaustion. You're going to have days that pretty much almost take you out. Anyone had one of those lately? Where like, it's 8:30 and you're like, I'm out. Bedtime. Bedtime. We are partying until 8:30 and then this train's going to bed. Like, we're done. Right? But those who trust in the Lord, and if you read in other versions, it says those who trust or wait in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. So all the things that you and I are going to need, if we can wait and trust God, he's going to bring those things. But we got to wait and listen and obey. And so this morning as we close and we have a verse of song and time to pray and ask God, what season are you in? We're all in one.
like stress, come join me, right? And I guess your season has some stress too, right? But in this season, God is working. And he wants to work in you and through you because he's got something else on the next side of this season. And we can wait and trust he's not going to fail. If you think of Elijah, you think of David, you think of Joseph, when we're in a waiting room, we should actually be honored. Because then we can know that God's got us in process. He's doing something. He's not idly sitting up there and saying, well, if you ever get your life figured out, Tonya, I'll come back and see how you're doing in 10 years. It's not. He's right there in every situation. There's not a room he can't get into. And so as we get ready to close, I just want you to take time and pray. And ask God, and you can pray at your seat. If you want someone to pray with you, we can pray up here, absolutely. But this is our time to say, God, what are you doing? And what do I need to do in this season? Heavenly Father, I just ask that you be with us this morning. God, I'm just honored that you would allow your word to be so personal to us, even as we are reading the history of someone else's life that you used, that God, it still speaks volumes to us today. That God, we can learn how to listen, how to obey. And God, we can trust just as they did that you will provide. And it may not happen the way we think, God. It could be through ravens. It could be through a brook. It could be through a widow who has nothing. And God, that is another lesson to take away, that we don't know how you're going to move. But we should be open and available so that you can move and that we can participate in the miracles you want to do, Lord. I ask that each one here, God, I know that you love and care for each one because you sent your son. And I know they're in a season right now, and they may be sitting there and be the only one that knows that season. Maybe no one else knows except you. And God, I ask that you would speak so lovingly to their hearts, that you would be so clear and concise as they seek you from this point on. God, maybe they've not been listening, maybe they haven't understood. But I feel like today, God, they are sincerely listening and saying, God, what do you want? Because I want to follow you. Lord, I ask that we would be faithful to not only hear, but to then obey. In Jesus'